All right, hi everybody. My name is Jim Burkhead with NSM Insurance Group. NSM is a specialty insurance provider, bringing over $1 billion in annual premium, and I lead our practice focusing on owner-operators called True Transport Insure. We work with about 20,000 owner-operators nationally, and through that work, have had the good fortune of being connected with the Graw Group, Doug Graw, and Gary Randall, the Graw Group, and they're two of the best subject matter experts in this field of the independent contractor model. In the nation. They very good at what they do. They have a ton of successful experience incorporating the concepts we're going to talk about with a major national motor carrier, and now they work with motor carriers all across the country in implementing these concepts and really bringing value and driving growth in these motor carriers all over the country. So before I kick it over to Tug and Gary to run through our presentation today, a couple of items I want to note. One is going to be about 45 minutes, give or take. If you have a question, submit it in the chat box. At the conclusion of the presentation, we'll run through any questions that are sent in. And then also, too, we will share copies of this at the end. So you will get a copy of the slides. I know sometimes people have concern if they'll get that or not. So you guys will have access to the information. So please enjoy. And Gary and Doug, you want to take it from there?
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Jim. We appreciate it. Again, like Jim said, my name is Doug Graw. Gary and I have known each other for many years, 15, 20 years, something like that. We worked together with a mid-sized to large motor carrier. I was the good-for-nothing lawyer. I was the general counsel for the organization and kind of a member of the executive team. And Gary led operations for 30-plus years. And the way Gary and I talk about it is, you know, I'm a little bit of the do's and don'ts on the legal side. You can do this, you can't do that. And Gary is more of okay, we understand the rules we got to play within, but let's worry about how we still have to make money and how we still have to make this thing work. Gary had the P&L responsibility. I had the risk management responsibility. And that's why we think what we're doing works for people is we're providing you that practical guidance. And with that, we want to talk about owner-operators. Again, our background, the carrier that we grew up with, they're built on owner-operators. They're known for owner-operators. That's their history. So we have a lot of experience working that history, and all of our clients today utilize owner-operators either exclusively or as a significant part of their fleet. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about a handful of different things. We're going to talk about the word choices you use, and you're going to think to yourself, why do we really care about the word choice? But it matters, and we'll talk about why it does. We'll get into, you know, the how to make sure you're treating them independent throughout your entire relationship. We're going to talk about contracting with independent contractors, kind of what does a good contract look like. And then lastly, we'll give a brief update on what's going on legislatively at the federal level, as well as what's going on with California's AB 5. I cannot wait until I'm done talking about California and AB 5, but that's not going to be any time real soon. So with that, let's talk about words and why they matter. And as a precursor, throughout this discussion, we're going to be talking about we're going to use the phrase owner-operator. We're going to use the phrase independent contractor. In this discussion, we're talking about owner-operators that lease equipment to motor carriers under the truth in leasing regulations, which we'll talk about a little bit more. We're talking about owner-operators that use the authority of trucking companies. This is not the owner-operator with their own authority. That's a different discussion. We're not talking about those folks. So with that, you know, Gary, something that you and I talk a lot about times, and I know sometimes would get a little bit frustrating internally, but there's some labels that just don't make sense when it comes to owner operators. Gary, can you talk a little bit about some of the words that, you know, we just don't use those labels when we talk about owner operators?
Well, and I think some of the labels get used interchangeably, and that's incorrect as well, right, Doug?
That's correct.
I think that as the slide says today, an owner-operator equals an independent contractor. But it's not necessarily true that each time an independent contractor is an owner-operator. You've got people that are lease purchase drivers, and Doug just referenced them. Those are the folks many of the folks that we're talking about today. Someone who is purchasing a tractor through a company, and they're bringing that tractor to a trucking company, and they're leasing that tractor on to that trucking company. The owner operator doesn't have to be a lease purchase driver. The owner operator could be someone who's driving a company truck that is on a lease program with no intention. We've got a client that has a very large program of owner operators that lease trucks but have no intention of buying or purchasing those trucks.
So
a master contractor, think of that as a fleet owner. And then a lease driver, for the sake of this conversation, we'd refer to as a temp.
You're exactly right, Gary. And these labels matter because you don't want to get lazy with the way you refer to your owner operators. If you do, your people are going to get lazy. And if your people get lazy, then you're not going to respect the freedom. You're not going to respect the distinctions between your business and the owner operator's business. Gary's exactly right. They're all independent contractors. An independent contractor is someone who provides a truck and a driver to a motor carrier. An owner operator is someone who provides a truck and drives the truck themselves. A master contractor is an independent contractor that provides a truck and provides someone else to drive the truck. A lease driver is going to a temp agency and finding someone that can drive your truck. Company driver, that's an employee driver. And a lessee, that's when you start talking about lease purchase programs. If you have a sister company that is doing lease purchase, the lease purchase's customer is the lessee. That lessee is the motor carrier's independent contractors. Words that make me cringe is when I hear people talk about, well, that one's a true owner operator. Well, no, there's no such thing as a true owner operator. An owner operator is someone who owns or leases their truck and drives it. Whether they own it or they lease it doesn't change whether or not they're an owner operator. And a lease purchase driver, if you start talking to them like they're a lease purchase driver, you're going to think company driver. The motor carrier should not care how the person gets their truck. Okay, they should only care that they are providing a truck and providing a driver. The lease purchase part of your business can make that distinction. And Gary, you were in operations, and for you, at the end of the day, wouldn't you say that you were just focused on, did you provide me a truck? Did you provide me a driver? I don't care where you got your truck.
That's exactly right, Doug. From the operations seat, it's about the outcome of the day, and the outcome of the day is determined upon the driver and the tractor.
And that's what we build. We build all of our relationship around who is providing the truck and who's providing the driver, and is that truck and is that driver meeting our expectations? So when you're talking to an owner operator, you always got to be thinking about who is doing the talking. Okay, are you doing the talking as a motor carrier, or are you doing the talking as a lease purchase program? We bring up lease purchase programs because when it comes to misclassification, independent contractor status, lease purchase is what gets trucking companies in the most trouble. And one of the things that they do is they don't separate the lease purchase relationship from the motor carrier relationship. As Gary just said, in operations, you care about the outcome of the day. You care about, did we get the loads moved safely and legally and on time? We don't really care whether or not we made truck payments. Now, the leader of operations is also an executive within the organization, and they understand the importance of making truck payments and the importance of the lease purchase program doing well. But when they're in their operations world, they should just be thinking about moving the loads, taking care of drivers, and taking care of contractors. Let the lease purchase arm worry about lease purchase issues and lease purchase discussions. When you're talking to the contractor, make sure you understand, am I talking to them as the lease purchase arm, or am I talking to them as the motor carrier arm? Similarly, when you are talking to the independent contractor, are you talking to them as the driver, meaning you're having a conversation with them about their safety issues, you're having a conversation about their service? In those conversations, you're talking to them as the driver. Hey, Joe, we got to pick up our service. We're not delivering freight on time. This is the second speeding ticket you've received in the past 6 months. We need to have a conversation about safety. Okay. In those instances, you're talking to them as drivers. But if you're talking to them and saying, hey, Joe, you've had 2 speeding violations and now you're disqualified as a driver, your next part of that discussion is going to be, and we need to cancel your contract. Then you're talking to them as an independent contractor, and the tone of the conversation changes. The words change. So Gary, you had to have these conversations all the time, and you know that 99 times out of 100, the driver and the independent contractor are the same person. But there's still a way to make that distinction in your head as that conversation evolves. Can you share a few thoughts about that?
I think you kind of hit it on the head with your first comment. The conversation really comes down to results and then actions. The results, hey Joe, you've had too many speeding tickets. Hey Joe, you've provided poor customer service to our #1 customer, and we've had a complaint. Multiple times we've had a complaint. Those are actions that driver's taking. When the conversation turns to, Joe, we're going to decertify today, that conversation turns to that relationship as he's a contractor. And so we're not going to fire him for those mistakes. We're going to decertify him. We spend a lot of time in this presentation, and rightfully so, talking about words. And the words are critical when you find yourself in a conversation like that.
Yeah, you're right. And again, I know that we can come across as sounding like, really, is this the stuff that matters? But just think about your frontline employees. If you are adamant that your employees treat independent contractors as independent contractors, you want them to distinguish between the driver and the independent contractor. Hey, Joe, you can't drive anymore, but you have a contract with us. Do you have someone else that can fill the truck? If your people understand that distinction, you are going a long ways to respecting the independence of that contractor throughout your relationship. Okay, let's talk about some other words that can matter. There's a laundry list of these things, and we don't need to go through all of them. Simple things, vacations. Do we really care about whether or not the independent contractor is on vacation or not on vacation? They don't get 2 weeks of vacation like employees. Those are all employee words. Okay, independent contractors are either available to do work or they're not available. Okay, that's what we cared about. We care about, when it comes to independent contractors, can you, the safety people are thinking to themselves, are you qualified or are you not qualified? Safety should not be doing hiring and firing decisions. They should be determining whether or not the person is qualified or disqualified. Payroll. There's no such thing as payroll with independent contractors. They're paid via settlements. Okay. We don't put independent contractors through training. We educate them. We give them tips. We give them best practices. We coach them, but we do not train them. And Gary, we'll get into this as we move on. Once you get beyond words, you got to respect the independence throughout in all functions. And again, that can come across in the way you dispatch them and in how you talk to them. From an independent contractor perspective, Gary, you had to do a lot of coaching when you would have loved to have done managing, correct?
For sure. I think what we're trying to say with this first section is that words and actions create the culture of your operation. It's not one or the other. You really have to have both of them working in sync. And so those conversations, those coaching conversations with contractors, our experience has been that the most successful coaching conversations help that contractor understand how he or her are going to better their business, better their own business. You have to make them understand and help them understand what's in it for them. Why is doing it this way better for me than if I would continue to do it the way I have been doing it? Why are these guys talking to me about best practices? Well, because we've learned through experience that the most successful contractors follow these best practices. We're not telling you that's how you have to run your business. We're telling you that's what we've seen other contractors do to have success. And so an example of that would be, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but contractor choice when it comes to the loads that they take. It was not uncommon to have a conversation with a contractor where we were coaching them to run the system. And what we meant by that is when you decide to become available and you're going to come out and work, we'd strongly encourage you to run the system, because we could point to example after example after example of the most financially successful contractors we had were folks that were never waiting for that perfect load. They were folks that came out into the system and they ran the system for the amount of time they wanted to work. Then when it was time that they wanted to go home, that was on our shoulders to make sure we got those folks home.
Yeah, well said, Gary. And so as we talk about independence and preserving the right of the contractor to choose independence or to choose employment, we have to keep a couple of things in mind. We care about the little things because there's a really big thing that we can't really do anything about, okay? When somebody claims that they've been misclassified as an independent contractor, shouldn't have been an employee, outside of trucking, we'll set trucking aside for a minute, the best way to prove that someone is independent and not an employee is to say, well, they had multiple customers. They were doing this work for me and they were doing this work for somebody else and a third person and so on. They clearly are in business for themselves. The problem is that trucking can't do that very easily. Trucking is bound by what's called the truth in leasing regulations. The truth in leasing regulations say that the truck has to be exclusive to the motor carrier. Okay, well, if the regulation says the truck can't move, can't go between carriers, then it's really hard for the owner-operator, for the independent contractor to provide service to multiple customers, to have multiple people paying it, to get multiple 1099s. If you have a client, if you're a carrier or you're an insurance provider and you have a carrier client that is just absolutely, we do not want to have misclassification issues. We want the most defensible program there is. There are really three options. One, you go to employees and you abandon independent contractor model. Two, you adopt a broker carrier model where you become a broker and the owner operators get their own authority and they're the carriers. Or third, a slight variation is you become a freight forwarder. The only difference there really is about cargo liability. We're not here to talk about those options. Those are much larger, more fundamental changes to your business. Happy to help anybody go through that process, but it's just a different conversation. So again, we're talking about the owner operator who remains leasing a truck to you, to your carrier under the truth in leasing regulations, what I would refer to as the traditional owner operator model. Okay, that's why we got to care about the little stuff, because we can't do the best defense. We can't say, well, he's hauling for Schneider today and Swift tomorrow and JB Hunt the day after that. It doesn't work in trucking because of the truth in leasing regulations. Okay, so independence throughout. Independence starts from day one. You can't say you have an independent contractor program and have a website that just talks about employee driver opportunities. You can't have an independent contractor program and have social media postings about all of your independent contractor jobs. Your words matter from the very beginning. Now, don't run out and revise your website just because that's the way the lawyer says it should be done. Any website designed by a lawyer is probably not going to be a very good website. Same thing with social media and various postings and so on. The trick is to find the blend between doing what you have to do on the marketing side. You still have to be smart from a Google and search and where you rank and all that kind of stuff. So you have to use words that are appropriate for that purpose. But there are ways to blend those marketing needs with still talking about that you're offering contract opportunities, you're offering business opportunities, you're offering owner-operator opportunities, that your owner-operator program is distinct from your employee program. Same thing with your forms that people are filling out, your policies and procedures. Do they talk differently about the independent contractors in your world versus the employees in your world? The little stuff matters. Any plaintiff's lawyer who's any good, they're going to be looking at all the little things to see if you're consistently treating them as independent. And along those lines, a problem that the companies run into, I go back to, is this lease purchase. So if your lease purchase program is in a separate legal entity, but all of your marketing is about your trucking brand, and your trucking company offers, you have postings about, come here for our lease purchase program, come here for the ABC trucking company's lease purchase program. Well, that to me sounds like your trucking company has a lease purchase program, but legally you don't. You have a separate company that has that. There's got to be a way, you got to find a way to still get to make sure that the owner operator doesn't get on the stand someday and say, well, I got my truck from ABC Trucking Company. You want to be able to point to it and say, no. He got his truck from ABC Leasing Company and he knew it. We didn't hide it anywhere along the lines. A good plaintiff's lawyer is going to argue the lease purchase program and the trucking company are all one and the same. So you have to build up as much differentiation between those two companies as you possibly can. Okay, but then we get into operations, okay, the real meat of it. Even if you do a great job on the front end of saying all the right things, using the right words and so on, you still have to operationally treat them like independent contractors. Gary, what are some tips that you would suggest to people about how to work with independent contractors, how to understand the differences between independent contractors and employees in your operations world?
Yeah, I would say a lot of it revolves around measurements or metrics. So that second bullet point there, that is there a difference in your metrics? For instance, when we talk to employee drivers, we talk to them about their work schedule, and their work schedule was set. When we talk to independent contractors, we talk to them about their active days, and we tried to understand from them what their goal for their business was in terms of being active. Now, we also were able to show them examples of if you're active this many days, you should expect this in terms of compensation. If you're active less than that, you should expect less than that. But the point is, no one was telling them you have to be active, or no one was telling them you have a specific work schedule like we did with our employee drivers. So that would be one example of activity and how we differentiated.
If I can interject there, Gary, can you talk a little bit about expectations exchange? Because you're exactly right. It is about the owner-operator telling us what their expectations are. But I think it's fair, and I know that you believe this too, once the owner-operator sets those expectations, it's fair to hold them accountable, isn't it?
Sure it is. And I think it's also important when you first enter a relationship with that contractor and you have this expectations exchange, you want to make sure that you understand what their perspective is. How often are they going to work? What part of the network are they willing to drive in? you want to understand that from them. They're contractors. They're going to make those decisions. But then as part of that expectations exchange, you want to explain to them those actions on your part should get you these results. So let's do a little check and balance here. Let's make sure that you're telling me you're willing to work this many days and you're willing to run this part of our network. I'm telling you that based on experience, folks that do that earn this much on their settlement check. Does that work for you? Do your thoughts equal the results that you want to achieve for your company? And sometimes the contractor would come in and be very happy with that. Sometimes the contractor would come in and say, well, I've got to make more money than that. And then we had an opportunity to coach. Well, then instead of trying to work 4 days a week, what would happen if you worked 5 or 5.5 days a week? Let's look at those numbers. And so those were coaching opportunities to try to make sure that as the relationship moves forward, it's a healthy relationship and that expectations on both sides are being met.
Yeah, and also so the person says, I'm willing to work 4 days a week and I'm willing to run this part of our system. And then when you would offer them a load that fits that mold, that model, and they turn it down, again, legally they have the right to turn it down. But I think, again, I know you well. I know you coach on that and say, Joe, you just turned down a load that you told me that you would be willing to accept because it's within the 4 days that you told me. It's within the network that you told me. What's going on here?
Yeah, we would ask what has changed. And, sometimes it was something as simple as, well, my brother's birthday is Saturday and I need to be there. It's his 50th birthday. And his brother happened to live in a part of the country that he had never told us he wanted to run toward. The conversation then was, Joe, that's how important communication is between you and your fleet manager. You're a contractor, you're working within our system. We want to work with you and make sure that your business needs or your personal needs are being met, but you got to communicate to us, let us know that.
Yeah, and I think this whole mantra of this expectations exchange, I think, is huge throughout the entire operations relationship. And I think there are a variety of other ways in operations we reinforce the independence without sacrificing our ability to perform and meet our P&L responsibilities. I know one question that you got a lot of times, Gary, was, well, I don't want that load, but I want one of these 2 other loads. But that's not always what you've got available for contractors, correct?
Right. I mean, the freight is what it is. Hopefully, as an organization, you've done a good job of marketing and selling, and you've found freight within your network, whatever that network is, that's going to meet expectations. When the contractor came aboard, when the contractor was recruited to come aboard, the recruiter has an obligation to make sure the contractor understands, here's what our network is, here's where you'll be operating if you come on board with us. I think it's important, though, to understand that you have a contractor base that wants to operate within a certain network, and then your obligation as an organization is to go out and to try to find freight that fits that network, and then in reverse, find drivers that want to fit into that freight network that you have. The two sides need to match up for success.
Yep. And on a day-to-day level, I think a lot of people think to themselves, okay, I've got owner operators, and some lawyer told me I've got to make sure that they've got choices and they can turn down freight and so on. And you're right, you do have to make sure they've got choices, and you do have to make sure they have the right to turn down freight. But choices doesn't always have to mean you got to pick between 5 loads, or you got to see a load board and pick whatever you want and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, that's nice if you can do that. If that works for you, great, do that. That's a better defense to independent contractor status. But sometimes choice can mean, I have this load for you, Joe. That's what I have. I don't have anything else. If you don't want to work, that's fine. I'll let you know when I've got something else. It may be a half day to a day, maybe even 2 days away. That's okay. It is important, whatever system you're using. I'm not a brand loyalist when it comes to what kind of a dispatching system that you might use. What your dispatch process is, whether it's verbal, whether it's mobile, and so on. But you do want as much documentation as you can of the choices the contractor had. It's really nice if you can say, yes, he definitely could turn down freight. I offered him 400 loads last year. He turned down 12% of them. Okay, that type of evidence, if you're ever in a misclassification claim, is huge. It's proof that they had the right and that you didn't penalize them for turning stuff down. It's great if the way you dispatch them, you have some kind of documentation that it is not a forced dispatch system. You're giving them information about the loads. You're giving them, again, documented ability to either accept or reject it. You can have time limits on it. You don't have to give them unlimited time to accept freight. But if you can document that you're giving them those options, that goes a long way to supporting that independence.
But I think an important point too, Doug, is that there probably are people out there that work for carriers that have this thought of, you can't be profitable using contractors because they're going to want to go every which direction that you don't have freight. They're going to want to be home when you want them to work. They're going to want to be on the road when you're light on freight. There's this big misconception that particular side of the driving group, the contractor side, is unmanageable. First of all, we don't manage contractors. We coach, we work with contractors, but there's a perception in the industry with some folks that says you can't win with contractors. And I think one of the points we want to try to make is that we experienced winning with contractors. There are plenty of people out there that do it. It's just a matter of really that expectations exchange is critical. They have to understand what your company offers, and you have to understand what they're trying to do with their business. And when you can find common ground there, you can do very well together.
Yep. Yeah, and that expectations exchange then I think also goes into safety. And the most important thing to remember about safety is, to me, safety focuses on the driver. Now, independent contractors, depending on how your contract is structured, but in my world, the independent contractor has the right to put someone in the truck. If they have the right to put someone that you approve, they don't just get to put anybody. You have to be able to approve them, and they have to meet your standards and legal standards and all that kind of stuff. But safety is just focused on whoever is driving the truck. So they're focused on qualifications, disqualifications, certifications, decertifications, whatever kind of terminology that works for you. They are not in the business of hiring and firing or canceling contracts. Now, let me pause and say there are a whole bunch of trucking companies that, just from a size, from a workload standpoint, they have people that wear multiple hats. I'm not suggesting that Bill can't be in charge of safety and be in charge of handling the contract administration for independent contractors. Bill can do that, but Bill needs to understand when he's talking to the contractor as a contractor and about the contract versus when is Bill talking to the driver about, you're speeding too much, you were caught texting and driving, whatever the case may be is. Safety needs to make sure they're focused on the driver when they're talking about safety. They're not talking about the contractor and the contractor's rights and so on. They also need to go ahead, Gary.
Excuse me. I think one way for our audience to be clear on that and understand that is, think of safety as the action. It's not the contract. It's not the contractor. It's whoever's behind the wheel in that truck. Safety is defined by the action that they're taking or not taking. when they're either doing a pre-trip, a post-trip, or when they're in the truck operating the vehicle.
Yep. That's exactly right. And it's to that end of the actions, it's important that safety obviously know the regulations, and know who they apply to. The DOT safety regulations are very clear that they apply to independent contractors and employees alike. They do not distinguish between the two. But they apply to Gary's point, they apply to the actions. They apply to whoever is driving. If you have a master contractor scenario, so I'm the master contractor and Gary's the driver, it doesn't matter if I don't have a CDL, if I don't have a medical card and all those kind of things, because I'm not driving the truck. It matters that Gary has those things, and safety needs to understand who the regulation applies to. It applies to the driver, not to the independent contractor. And when safety is going about its business, you're using education as incentives and disincentives, much more so than you're using it as training. It is not a remedial training resource. You can say, hey, Gary, that's your second backing incident. I need you to go through some more backing work in order to keep up your qualification. That's fine. But you can't say, Gary, I'm canceling your contract because you had 2 backing incidents. To Gary's point, safety needs to be focusing on the action, the backing incident. If Gary refuses to, I'm not going to go to any classes about backing. Okay, well then you're not qualified to drive the truck anymore according to my standards. So until you find a different driver, I'm going to say your contract's canceled. Okay, that distinction matters. And I want to leave you with this when it comes to safety. All of independent contractor status is about balancing tests. Okay, you are never going to win or lose a misclassification claim on one thing. It's always going to come down to a variety of things, and some judge is going to weigh it, and left hand, right hand, and they're going to make a decision. Okay, there are going to be times when you're going to blur the line. Obviously, I'd recommend blurring it as little as possible. If you are going to blur the line in an area, there is plenty of case law out there that backs up motor carriers when they blur the line on safety. And I think we can all agree why. At the end of the day, all of us want our people to get home safe, whether they're independent contractors or employees. All of us want the people that we drive around, the motoring public, to get home safe as well. So again, if you're going to blur the line, I'm not saying you should, or I'm not recommending it, but if you do, the area where I probably would do a little bit more blurring would be safety, as opposed to some other areas. So before we move on from this, kind of pause here for a second, because Gary, again, something I know you have to deal with a lot of times is, okay, lawyer, get out of the way, because I still got to make money. How am I supposed to remember all the words to use? How am I supposed to do all these things? But I still got to report to the owners, and I still got to make money. How do I balance some of these independent contractor things that you're talking to me about with my need to make money?
Yeah, I mean, I would go back to the relationship between the dispatcher or fleet manager, whatever title you give that position, and the contractor is critical. The dispatcher has to have that expectations exchange with the contractor. They have to know what that person's trying to do with his or her business. And then they have to look at the freight that's available, and they have to do their best to try to put those two together. And it's great when you can offer multiple loads as a choice. It's also great when you know that your contractor, Joe, will always take a load from St. Louis to Dallas, and there's a St. Louis to Dallas available today, and you get them dispatched on that load and get them going with one conversation, with a quick transaction. I think that what has to happen is there has to be an understanding of what the contractor is trying to do, and there has to be good communication between operations and sales in terms of, is this business that our fleet wants, or is it business that no one in our fleet wants? Now, obviously, those are the two ends of the spectrum, and the reality's in the middle there somewhere. But most of the time, it's important for operations to say, most of the time, we've got an opportunity or a load that a contractor will take. And if you start to find your company selling freight that no one wants, that's an issue. And you can dig your heels into the ground. You can say, well, this is the freight we have. We're going to have to move it. That's a little bit of a fool's mission, because if the driving fleet doesn't want the freight, it's not going to move in a timely fashion anyway. And your service numbers are going to suffer because of it. Eventually, you're going to lose the business anyway. So your best bet is to understand, here's what our fleet generally likes to do. Here's the network that the company has decided to operate in. And here's the freight that fits as best as possible for both sides of the group.
Yep. And it just comes back to that expectations exchange, because again, you want to collect as much expectations from the contractor, but it is also fair to make sure you're sharing your expectations with the contractor. It's a two-way street. It's a business. Just like your customers hold you accountable, you can hold the contractor accountable too. You just got to do it in a business-to-business way, not in an employer-employee remedial training, progressive discipline kind of way. Okay, there are ways to do it, and Gary and I have lived it. It can be done. I'm going to go a little bit faster through a couple things in the interest of time. Similarly, though, with fuel and maintenance, make sure you're using incentives and disincentives as far as the fuel routing that you want, the repair shops you want them to use. You can influence them through incentives and disincentives. You just don't want to do it through forced routing. And this fuel and maintenance is an area where this lease purchase discussion, or this lease purchase relationship, and the motor carrier relationship can start to get blurry. If your lease purchase arm wants to put in restrictions or controls around maintenance locations, then make that the lease purchase program's deal. Don't make it the motor carrier arm's deal, and make sure everyone's clear on that. Okay, make sure that your fleet and your fuel folks, your maintenance folks understand when they're talking to those owner operators, who are they talking to? Are they talking to the driver? Or are they talking to the independent contractor? Okay, and also, don't forget some of your legal obligations here. You do still have to collect and retain maintenance records, so it's okay to ask independent contractors for maintenance records, because again, that's a legal obligation. When it comes to administration, similar thoughts here. Make sure you're distinguishing your independent contractor administration from your employee administration. I'm not saying that HR can't have manage your relationships with your independent contractors, but if they are going to, make sure they understand the difference. In a better world, your independent contractor administrative system is separate from your HRIS. It's administered by people who are not in human resources. You don't give independent contractors your employee driver handbook. Okay, your independent contractors don't get paid by the same people that do payroll for your employee drivers. Sometimes the size of your company dictates that there's some crossover here, but if you can, separate out your inner workings with your independent contractors from your workings with your employees. Okay, so let's talk about the contracts briefly. Okay, remember, when it comes to contracts with independent contractors, you are never going to win your case on misclassification because you have a great contract, but you will lose one if you have a bad contract. Contracts are the bare minimum for independent contractor status. It's unfortunate, but you can't just say, well, he signed a contract, so he's an independent contractor. Courts are going to look at more than that. So we kind of outlined a handful of things to keep in mind as you create a contract for an independent contractor. Step one, understand what it is you are contracting for. You're contracting for a person to provide a truck and a driver. You're not necessarily contracting for a specific person to drive the truck. You have to make sure you cover the truth in leasing regulations. Those are the lawsuits that, those are the regulations that OIDA brings lawsuits about. You got to make sure you cover those things. They're going to cover how settlement deductions work and how escrow accounts work and so on. You got to cover state issues. New York has unique language about independent contractor status. Illinois has unique language. Georgia has unique language. You have to make sure that your contract addresses any states that you have contractors that live in. Your relationship might have to be a little bit different depending on the state that they live in. Okay. Then you want to cover safety and compliance. Then you want to cover business issues, and then you want to cover your legalese. I do believe in arbitration clauses. I do believe in class action waivers. You're not necessarily always going to win with those, but done right, they can be a good way to resolve issues. And last but definitely not least, any independent contractor that's going to bring a claim for misclassification is going to say that the contract was forced upon them, that they didn't have a chance to read it, that they didn't have a chance to negotiate it, that it was all legalese, and so on. Simplify your contract as much as possible. Simplify the process. Give them time to review it. If you can, build in some options within the contract. They can choose this, they can choose that. Take away those arguments that it was forced upon them and they didn't have a chance to review it. Okay, so let's talk about a legal update here. What's going on in the world of independent contractor status? You've heard undoubtedly about AB5 and the ABC test. So what is AB5? What is the ABC test? AB5 is a piece of legislation that passed in California a few years ago. It implements what's called a version of the ABC test. There are a lot of versions of the ABC test out there. California is the worst. Massachusetts, Virginia, they also had very bad versions as well, but their versions were thrown out. So California's got the really bad one left in the country. So California's version applies beyond trucking. It applies to most industries. There's an exception for about 25 different industries, but for most of them it does apply. First thing is, it says you got to be free. The worker has to be free from control. That's normal. That's in every independent contractor test. The last factor, the C factor, says that they have to be in an independently established trade. Pretty common in most independent contractor tests. Usually not that much of a deal breaker. Where California goes crazy, where their rule is just not workable for trucking in any meaningful way, is they say that the worker cannot be performing a service that is integral to the motor carrier's business. Well, that means a driver can't be an independent contractor of a trucking company. A software engineer can't be an independent contractor of a software company. That's what the B prong does. And like I talked about earlier on, because of the truth in leasing regulations, the contractor can't jump from trucking company to trucking company, okay? Recruiting and retention stuff aside, they legally can't do it very easily. That makes this ABC test very difficult to meet. So there are legal challenges going on, and they're both before the U.S. Supreme Court, or they're coming up before the U.S. Supreme Court. One is brought by a company called Cal Cartage, and the other is brought by the California Trucking Association. There are some differences between the case, but they both fundamentally come down to, does federal law prevent a state from passing a labor law that would effectively eliminate the independent contractor model? And there are a variety of people that are pushing to have that, have federal law preempt. Selfish plug here. Gary and I are one of the people we're pushing. We've submitted some briefs on this issue, and we'll continue to do so. So we're all waiting to see what is the U.S. Supreme Court going to do. There's no guarantee that they're going to take the case. I would say there is a decent chance they will. But right now, we are currently waiting for the California Trucking Association and a handful of interested groups to submit their briefs to the U.S. Supreme Court. Then the U.S. Supreme Court will decide whether or not they're going to take the case. The U.S. Supreme Court takes on average less than 2% of the cases that it could take in a given year. So every case is very unlikely to be taken. But I would say there is a decent chance this one gets taken. That this is a meaningful issue to a large segment of the economy. So I think there's a decent chance it gets taken. The other notable thing is what's called the ProAct. The ProAct is a piece of federal legislation. It has passed the U.S. House. It is currently stalled in the U.S. Senate. It is a laundry list of, it's a wish list, I should say, of things for organized labor. Okay, and you could probably convince me some of it's not terrible, but a lot of it is. And one of the things that the ProAct does is it would adopt the ABC test, the California version of the ABC test for the National Labor Relations Act. Okay, I don't care what anyone else tells you. If that passes, that would, I'm reluctant to ever say that just automatically loses, but it would be really hard to figure out how to maintain an independent contractor program if the ABC test applied under the National Labor Relations Act, because you would have to treat them as employees for union purposes, independent contractors for IRS purposes, independent contractor for EEOC purposes, and so on, and that would be realistically unmanageable. Okay, this will likely remain stalled in the House. I think there's a decent chance it doesn't go anywhere, a better than decent chance it doesn't go anywhere, for a couple of reasons. One, they don't have the votes currently. The only way they can get the votes, the Democrats can get the votes, is if they eliminate the filibuster. If they eliminate the filibuster or change the filibuster, then the ProAct would be seriously debated. I don't think every Democrat necessarily is in favor of the ProAct. So they like right now that they can say they're in support of it, even though, because they know it's not going anywhere. If it actually might go somewhere, then I think there'd be some meaningful debate on it. But the key is to watch the filibuster. If in the midterm elections, the Republicans pick up some seats, then the ProAct's life is diminished. But those are the things to watch out for. Okay, when it comes to misclassification, just remember a handful of things. Misclassification claims come up via unemployment, work comp, or some kind of a pay dispute. So injuries and pay disputes. There are a variety of ways to handle them. To me, prevention is the best way, and that's following a lot of the tips that Gary and I shared today. But there's also good insurance options out there. I know NSM is one of them. They've got a lot of good programs out there that can help you manage misclassification risk, both when it comes to, we're talking about insurance for you, but also when we're talking about insurance for owner-operators. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to mess with independent contractors' money. You do not want to let small fires burn. As something Gary talks about a lot is, hey, windshield time. Owner-operators get a lot of time behind the windshield, and if that conversation didn't go fantastic with them today, if it didn't go well, it can sit, it can fester, it can smolder, and it can burn. Don't let those small fires burn. Resolve issues, make sure they're fully resolved. And last but not least, sometimes it's okay to live to fight another day. You may want to fight a contractor about anything and everything, but sometimes live to fight another day, deal with the problem, get rid of it, whatever that takes, and then move on and learn from it and live to fight another day. With that, Jim, I know we've got a few minutes left here to answer any questions. Gary and I are very appreciative of the time. I guess I should say, Gary, any closing thoughts that you'd like our listeners to take away?
I think we pretty well covered it, and we are kind of running out of time here, so I'll be quick. But I think that the one takeaway that I would hope people come away with is when having independent contractors as part of your fleet, words and actions create the culture. The culture is going to be the piece that either supports your program or gets your program in trouble. So Doug used the term that there's a lot of little things that create big issues, and that's exactly it. It's words. It's paying attention to your words, and it's your actions should support those words. That's going to create the culture. You're either going to win or lose that way.
Well said. So thank you, Jim. We appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, no, thank you both for your time. I think that was very informative. I know, it's something that we do every day. Got a lot out of that. Something we'll definitely kind of go back, check out the slides. And I think, Doug, next slide, you have your contact information. If anyone would like to reach out, there's Doug and Gary's contact information. Please reach out to them with any questions, comments, concerns. I don't see any questions coming through in the chat right now. If anyone does have a question, please send that through. But in the essence of time, I think we're going to wrap it up. And thank you, everyone, for attending your time. Doug and Gary, thank you. You guys know how to reach us. I believe if you get us, get the contact information from NSM when we sent the invites out. Doug and Gary, your emails were there on the slide, and we're going to be sending the slides out to everybody. So any last thoughts, Doug and Gary?
Nope. Everybody have a good, safe 4th of July holiday.
Yep, same. No, thank you. Best of luck with everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.